Welcome to the Open to Hope show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Well, Heidi, we have got such a great friend on this show today.
I'm very excited because we have Ken Ross on, who is Dr. Elisabeth Kübler-Ross's son. We have been trying to get Ken on the show for 5 years. We have been doing the show for 5 years, okay? Ken has traveled all over the world and does travel all over the world, and he's very, very hard to track down.
Yep.
So we're excited to talk to him today. We want to do a show on honoring the legacy of Dr. Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, who died in 2004, and basically was the reason we're sitting here today, Mom.
Absolutely, absolutely. She just brought such a fabulous perspective to grief and loss, and we're going to hear her story and how she was a triplet, which I hadn't ever known, and just really wonderful things about her. And then we're going to have a couple of ladies who are in the field of grief and loss and recovery, and with an organization helping parents heal. And they're going to talk about what it's meant to them to have Elisabeth Kübler-Ross in the world too.
Absolutely. So let me talk about.
Well, let me say one thing
Yes.
first. I got to remind people. I don't want to forget this. That this is brought to you by the Open to Hope Foundation as well as the Compassionate Friends.
Yes, very good. So I have to use a little bit of a cue card, but not much because I know Ken. But as I said, Ken is the son of Dr. Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, and he is the founder of the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation, and he's the former president, and now he is the vice president. And while growing up, he traveled all over the world. He has been everywhere watching his mother and being with her as she did her work and changed the world and changed the way that we talked about grief and loss. And he is a professional photographer. I live vicariously through Ken because
That's right.
I get to see my backyard while he sees the world. So he is literally he might set me straight on this one. So Ken, you've traveled to 95 countries
So far.
and your goal is 101.
I'm in the home stretch.
Oh my
That is
gosh!
amazing.
And you will have seen them all, 101.
I'm going to keep going. I'm not going to stop
What are
there,
the other
but
ones? What are the places you're going?
I'd like to go to Mozambique, Madagascar, Ethiopia, Mali, Sri
I've been to
Lanka.
Ethiopia.
There you go.
The
See?
stone churches there, Lalibela.
Yes.
Fabulous.
And
can't
Ken
wait to go.
also lived abroad growing up with your mother, right?
I lived in Switzerland,
Yes.
Australia, and Sweden.
That is amazing. So he truly is international and has been able to see the world of grief and loss and the way that people deal with it all over the world.
Now let me talk a little bit about your mom. I was reading something about her. I didn't know that she had seen the concentration camps after
did.
World War II in the
Right.
children's shoes.
After World War II,
Yeah.
my mom vowed as soon as the war ended she would join a relief group. And her father said, "No, Elizabeth, you're a little teenage girl. Please be a little realistic." And my mother said, "Nonsense, I'm going to go and rebuild Europe." And that's exactly what she did. The day the war ended, she joined a relief group, and she was assigned to go to a little village in France. They didn't have money to send her there, so if you can imagine, she had to hitchhike through war-torn France, sleeping in cemeteries where she figured she wouldn't get attacked, and eventually she made it to this little town and spent several months there rebuilding the village.
Ah, my gosh, what an amazing story. Well, let's get way back, because I didn't know she was a triplet until I talked to you about it.
Yeah, it was a very important experience for my mother because she was not only a triplet, but she was a twin. And being a triplet and a twin, unfortunately, they couldn't tell them apart. So my mother really wanted to develop her own voice because they always thought, "Oh, we don't know which one you are, so we're going to give you all the same grades in school." My mother would get 2 baths, her sister would get none. And so my mother really fought to get her own voice as a child. And later when she worked with patients, she thought, these patients are just like me when I was young. They don't have their own voice. And so her experience as a child in a triplet led her to fight for the rights of all patients, not just dying patients.
And it seems to me that seeing World War II and seeing death and being around people who had loss and that kind of thing would have made her more able to be in that arena than a lot of other people.
Exactly, because she was exposed to death working in these little villages in Poland and all throughout Europe. And it really had a profound effect on her, just wondering how humanity can do this to each other, what people experience when they know they're going to die. And it really set off a lot of questions for my mother back in the 40s.
Yeah. So how did she get to the United States?
Well, she went to medical school and she met this young doctor to
Now,
be
where was she in medical school?
in University of Zurich.
Wow.
Okay.
And so there
Before a lot of women went
was,
to
yeah,
medical
she was
school.
very,
She
very
was-
early on. I mean, it was very shocking to have, female
Mm-hmm.
doctors back
Yeah.
in Switzerland in the 50s. So, but she met my father in medical school. They shared the same cadaver, if you can imagine.
That's a
Very
good
romantic
story.
story.
What's his name or her name? Do you know? I know they name him.
That's pretty
I wasn't privy to
amazing.
that information.
That's pretty interesting, given that she devoted her life to grief and loss and healing, and they met over a cadaver.
Exactly. So it was meant to be. It was in her karma. So eventually,
right.
my dad, being a good New Yorker, he wanted to come back to New York and
course.
kind of dragged my mother
We all
kicking and
do.
screaming, and it was quite a shock for my mom.
I bet.
And she got to the hospital and just realized that nobody died at the hospital, right?
Exactly. It was
And-
a 600-bed hospital, and she was told there was not a single dying patient. And she thought, wow, this must be the most amazing hospital in all of America. No one's dying.
Yeah.
You know, so she went to her friends' hospitals, and universally, there was not a single dying patient. So without permission, she went up and down the wards looking at charts and going, wait a minute, this person's dying, that person's dying. And she started talking to them and realizing, you know, they were constantly lied to.
Yeah.
Universally.
They were lied to. I didn't know this story. This is very
Yeah,
fascinating.
back in the 60s, you know,
Oh, you
death
didn't
was a
know.
taboo subject. You do not talk about it in the family.
And so sometimes the patients didn't even know they were dying?
Oh, none of them did. Not a
Okay.
single one. The families were told, well, there's a spot on the x-ray, we're not quite sure.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, nothing was actually spoken.
Yeah, I mean, your grandfather didn't tell his your grandmother that she was dying.
Yeah, and
She
they're
was
really...
dying of leukemia, and she was going to die. And I think I remember she asked, "Am I dying?" And he said, "Oh no." I mean, that's how bad
Exactly.
it was.
And the thing was that patients would be dying and their families would be right outside in the hallway, and they were not allowed to come in and say goodbye
Wow.
because it was against the rules. They could only have 5 minutes every hour. Didn't matter if the patient was actively dying, they were not allowed to spend time with.
And was she in
The
New York
dying
at the
family
time when
member.
she was doing this, or where was she living at that point?
She was living in Chicago.
She was living in Chicago,
Mhm.
okay. And so from there she decided she wanted to do something about it, or?
Exactly. She was just disgusted, and she was horrified because she grew up in rural Switzerland, where death is a part of the family and
Right.
a part of the village.
Yeah.
And, you know,
And they had the
people died at
bodies in
home.
their
It was
home.
very natural.
Yeah.
And she even kidnapped her father when he was dying, took him out of the hospital room midnight with her sisters, brought him home so he could die peacefully at home.
Was he in Zurich then?
Yeah.
Yeah,
mhm.
okay.
So that was back
So
in
even there
1960.
they
She
had
had
to
her
go-
own little mini hospice at home.
That's amazing.
Oh wow, that's absolutely amazing. So you know, hospice. I mean, she really is the inspiration.
Yes.
You know, for hospice. But hospice wasn't a new thing. You know,
No,
it
no.
was. She grew up with hospice.
Right,
She
exactly.
grew
I
up,
mean, you
took
know,
your
it wasn't
family
called
home.
hospice, but
Yeah.
people died at home.
It
and
was
just a
what-
natural part of life. And
Yeah.
then, you know, in America, as technology developed, people died at hospitals, and
Yeah.
death was hidden behind,
Yeah.
you know, walls and not talked about.
And so hospice became this new thing.
Right.
You
Mhm.
know?
We
So-
medicalized everything.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
tell us about her first book on death and dying.
Well,
Did she write articles, and was she a writer?
She was not a writer. She was giving workshops, small workshops, but she was not a writer. And so it was a very new experience to her. And she began it around 1967, right about the same time as Dame Cicely Saunders began the first hospice.
Uh-huh.
So even though Cicely gets credit for
And
it,
she
my
was
mother
in-
really independently had the idea
Uh-huh.
because On Death and Dying, she talks about letting people die at home peacefully.
Yeah.
So anyway, the book came out, and, you know,
But how did she write a book? I mean, she was busy working and
my mother
doing
was
all
like the
this thing
Energizer
and-
Bunny. Like at night, late at night, she'd come home and she typed it, you know, on a very simple typewriter for
Wow.
about 3 months. And, you know, she didn't think much of it, but, you know, it just exploded. I mean,
She
it
was
sold
passionate.
millions and
We
millions
all
of
read it.
copies. Yeah. And it still sells
It's
in
fabulous.
27 languages half a century later.
Yeah, yeah. I remember way back when I was in nursing school, we were reading it, we were talking about it, and we were talking about the stages, which you and I have talked about before, how people have the stages are lovely, you know, whatever, but that wasn't her whole thing in the
Well,
That
world.
was
when
just a
she
tiny part of
wrote
her
the
work.
stages,
Yeah.
she wrote it for people that were dying, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, and I always say, even now, people have used it towards people that are grieving. We do move in and out of things, in and out of a lot of those. It's just not as linear, but she never meant it to be for grieving people. But
Yes,
when-
and she also said it was not linear. She said
Yes.
people are not robots.
Exactly.
Everyone's grief is unique. That's what she said. But people think, oh, I have this new idea that, you know, grief is unique. I'm like, no, my mom actually said that 50 years ago.
Well, when you look at her things, you know, denial and anger and bargaining and depression and acceptance and all that, it's interesting because even this many years later after my brother died, I still move in and out of a lot of things, and I sometimes wake up and go, my brother died. Wow, did I have a brother? My brother actually died. It's interesting how we're constantly reworking.
You know what I
Those
really
kind of
love?
things.
I love that she knew the stages.
Dab dab.
I've got to
right.
think,
Yeah,
I've
dab
got
dab.
to think your mother
have
was
to.
somewhere laughing about
yes.
that. I really didn't. She say something about once those damn stages or
Oh,
something?
yeah, even back in the early 70s, she was on Oprah, and she's like, let's get past the stages, okay? That's not important. Just listen to the patients, for God's sakes.
Listen to the patient. Is that her major takeaways? Listen to the
Yeah,
patients.
she said that's the lesson of that book. Forget about the stages. Let's talk about listening to the patients, because we always want to project our own religion or beliefs or fears or whatever it is. Let the patient lead the discussion.
Let the patient
And
lead the discussion.
let them do it, when they're ready, not when you're ready.
Can I tell you, when you said listen to the patients, you sounded like her.
Yeah,
She's
Kenneth.
here. I know she's here, right?
Sometimes I bring back the spirit of her Swiss
Yeah.
accent.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and she didn't have a totally, completely easy life. I know later on she wanted to, I remember, take in kids who had AIDS, which was fabulous. I mean, this woman, she just really stepped forward
She did.
in her whole
She was
life.
the
Yeah.
trailblazer.
If you can imagine, she began the book in her 40s, and she wrote 24 books, hundreds of chapters, hospice projects, hospice movement, AIDS projects, jail projects, workshops, farmer, doctor, mother, and she retired in her 60s. So when people say, well, I can never do what your mother did, I don't have time, I'm too busy, I'm like, no. If she can do it, you can definitely do it.
That's amazing. And had children.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that too.
It's amazing.
Well, yeah, now, didn't you tell me later on she had some people helping her with her books?
With her books?
Books.
Well, she worked with David Kessler on the last two
Okay.
books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but she would just type it out late at night. I'd hear like 1, 2 in the morning. I'd hear that
That's
typewriter
amazing.
going, and
That's
That's
seriously.
amazing.
she'd be working on the mail. She'd be dictating the mail, and
That's
She's
incredible.
so
she'd be
full
cooking
of it.
for us, and she'd be doing a workshop at the same time, and
She definitely
taking care of her
multitasks.
llamas.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
for
So,
llamas, I
so I
love
want
that.
to know if what this brings up for Elisabeth and Irene.
Well, I
as
wanted to
you're
say
doing this.
one thing
Yeah.
before we got to them, because I was going to segue into them with her book on life after death.
Yes.
How eventually she did get interested in was there life after death and interviewed people, right?
Well, the interesting thing that a lot of people don't know was
I didn't know this.
On Death and Dying, written in the 60s, she wrote about life after death, but her colleagues said you have to take it out. If you put that in the book, you will never sell the book. No one will listen to it.
Oh my gosh.
And so she was almost forced to take it out of the book, and we've never found that chapter. But she was
No.
even writing about it back in the 60s.
I
But
didn't
it was
know
far
this.
too controversial to deal with at that time.
Wow. And she was writing about, what was she writing about? Just the fact that there was.
I don't know. I haven't seen the chapter, but
That is so
I know that
interesting.
chapter is floating around somewhere, and I'm
Yes.
hoping it turns up one
You
day.
will find
That's
it someday.
fascinating.
So she interviewed. How many people did she interview for a book on?
I believe it was only 200 patients.
About 200
It's amazing
people.
that these 200 patients, changed society.
Yeah, on life after death. Yeah. So now Elisabeth lives in Arizona, as do you.
In the same area. You live
The
in
same
what,
Close
area.
by,
Phoenix?
in
Yeah.
Cave Creek, and he's in Scottsdale.
Awesome. So
Close
you're
by.
just meeting.
We're neighbors.
Yes.
And Irene is a person who has been impacted by your mother, right? By
Elizabeth
Elizabeth,
Kübler-Ross.
yes.
The other
I mean,
Elizabeth. Yeah.
Yes.
her book, Life After Death, she described the afterlife as the return to the wholeness of spirit,
Right.
which is just incredible. That's our belief and what we talk about in helping parents heal. We're returning to its spirit.
Now talk about helping parents heal. You're the co-founder,
Yes.
so tell our audience about it.
So basically, we're different from other grief support groups because we talk about a connection that we have with our children in the afterlife, and we talk about the experiences that we have as we move forward in connecting with them. And I think that your mother started us along this path because of the fact that she demystified death, first of all, and then also was able to demystify grief. And it's so important to be able to talk about both of these things in our society. We do in India, we do in the Far Eastern countries, we do in Europe much more than we do here in the States, but it's something that affects all of us, and it's so important for all of us to be able to talk about our loved ones once they've passed, instead of just completely eliminating their names from our vocabulary and being afraid that by talking about them we're offending other people. So I think that she did that for us, which is just amazing, and I'm so grateful for that.
Oh, it's totally nice to hear.
And your daughter did hospice, right? Did
no, she
ever?
didn't. No,
Oh,
she
it was
didn't.
short.
Yes, it was a short,
Yeah.
very short.
Did you
period.
feel like people spoke to you at the hospital about the fact that she was dying? How did you
Yeah,
think
were
it-
they candid or open?
It was such an unusual diagnosis, and you know, since Carly was so young when she was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, I wasn't ready to hear that it was a fatal diagnosis, and I believed that she was going to survive.
Did she die in the hospital or at home?
She died at home.
Okay, well
She died
that's
at home.
nice.
Yes, yes, it
Yeah.
was. It was nice, and again, your mom in the books just spoke of death as a natural process, which it is. I mean, we're all going to die.
Exactly.
You know, and
She thought,
although
well, what's the big deal? I mean, it's like going down to the store. I mean,
yes, and while of course we would have loved to have our children on this earth much longer, it still is something that's natural, and just making it easier to talk about.
And yes, and not only that, but it continues after death. Our connection with them
yeah,
continues.
she
but
said we still have a relationship with them, and
yes, exactly.
still
yeah,
part of
just
our lives.
wonderful.
And
Now, how do you connect up with your mom? I know you've got a lot of her papers and all that kind of thing.
I do. I also feel like she's still with me because I have so many, sources of media from her. I have her lectures and
And you're
interviews
going-
and so forth, and I hear her voice literally every day while I'm processing, all the different things I have and
Uh-oh.
working on YouTube and different things. So she's always there haunting me in some ways. So.
And she's goal-oriented. She's a taskmaster.
Oh yeah, she
She's
is.
saying,
so
Ken, come on, do this and that.
kicks me in the tush.
And you're going to the Netherlands.
I am.
So tell us about that.
I'm very excited. My mom's getting a wonderful honor over there. She helped begin the first hospice in the Netherlands, so they're naming a town square after her, and the first hospice is going to be renamed after her next week. So I'm going over there for the ceremony.
How wonderful.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Her legacy definitely lives on, and she is doing as much in her death as she did in her life.
She is. We just started a new group in Chile. We're starting groups in India. We have our group in France just did a big project. Where else? One of our other groups, group in Japan, just completed their 40th workshop with people. So
Wow.
it's living on. It's very exciting.
Absolutely.
We're doing a conference in Argentina next year. So we have a lot
That's
of things
amazing.
going on.
So you're all over the world
Mm-hmm.
with her legacy and with the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation. And where can we go to find the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation? Do
We
you
can
just
go
Google
to ekrfoundation.org.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we're going to show a video of Elisabeth, and so you can see her and hear her voice. So
Once again.
let's watch that.
We are so honored to have you back on People Are Talking, and I guess we have to begin by finding out how we ourselves can accept death as a part of life instead of rejecting it and not really wanting to think about it and just putting it in the back of our minds. Why should people watching the show today want to hear about death?
I think a lot of people in the audience have either a terminal illness or have lost a child or are in the process of being forced to face the issue. When you're healthy and everything goes well, nobody wants to think about it, which is ridiculous. Because if you live fully and learn to live without fear and guilt, it doesn't matter whether you live 20 years or 90 years. And I think we have learned from dying patients not so much about the old stuff, the stages of dying, which is old, but how to live without fear and guilt so that when death occurs, it's okay.
That is the key to it, right?
Yes.
To accepting death, to live without fear and guilt so that you'll be able to accept it. How do you do that?
Fear and guilt are the only enemies of man. If you can learn to live without fears and guilt, you live every day so fully that you feel like you live 100 lives.
Should we, though, in life be thinking about, should we prepare ourselves for dying? It's, as you say, it's something, if you're healthy particularly, you don't really want to think about. How do you start to think about it?
To me, it's like people who live in Southern California, where I come from, or Florida, who have oranges on the ground and nobody picks them up, nobody appreciates them. And all you need to go is to Chicago and you would love to have a basket full of fresh oranges. You do not appreciate life when everything is nice and smooth until something hits you and then you begin to think about it. And our values are so distorted.
Amazing. Again, it's just amazing how your mom has impacted everybody.
And if people want to learn more about her, definitely Google her. Because when I Googled her, as you know, she's all over the internet. Photos, history, video. I mean, it's absolutely fabulous. Like I said, she laid the groundwork for us being able to candidly have these conversations.
Well, I think it's important for us to keep on having them, because I know one of the things your mom said when she became ill or had a stroke or what, it was that she was a little bit discouraged that people weren't more responsive at the hospital to grief and loss. Still,
Right.
she was still had that mission.
And she was a bad patient too.
But bad patients are the ones who survive.
Well,
And there's some
exactly.
research,
They're the ones that
there's some
agree.
research that
Right.
shows that.
Yeah, they are.
But I think it's important to keep for people in the healthcare industry and people in the in the grief and loss world to realize that, and that's what we're here about.
Well,
It's
Ken,
amazing.
what would your mom say needs to still happen today if she was here?
Well, she would say the problem with hospice in general is that there's too many of them. She said they're like,
Okay.
what does she call them? Chicken delights. With her Swiss interpretation of Kentucky Fried Chicken. She said there's too many of them. We're focusing on building quantity when we should focus on quality, obviously.
Okay.
And she said also there's a problem with the medicalization of grief. Here should be discussed it, with that going on. She said, let's
Yes.
get back to the basics. That's where we should be focusing on.
And that is, the basics are keeping people out of pain, listening to them.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just being honest with them, listening to them, and don't be afraid of death, obviously.
Yeah.
So have a lot of respect for your patients. Don't talk down to them.
Right.
They know they're the experts on their lives and what's working for
Exactly.
them.
Mhm.
And don't create a situation where you're kind of up here and they're down there. But listen to them. I like that because I still think we really need to listen to those patients out there.
Right. Put
And I know
yourself in
that
their
you-
shoes.
I know that you and Diane Gray have created situations where you've gone in and had groups of people that are grieving and have grieved and gone through the hospital process, educating the staff and the professionals. I love that you do that and creating those kind of dialogues back and forth.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's very important.
Yeah, it's so needed.
Yeah. Now, what are some of the major things that you talk about when you give your talks?
Well, I've been speaking with my mom for, decades.
Yeah.
And I find there's a broad range of questions. They all want to know, where did she begin? How did she get interest in death? What did she do after World War II? Why did she become a doctor? What was she like as a mother? What was it like traveling with
I
her?
wanna hear
What did
that.
I learn? So I try to cover everything in about an
amazing.
hour and 15 minutes, which is very difficult because I have thousands of stories, but I try to do a little slice of each pie and just enough to make, everyone's happy as possible.
Give us one of your favorite stories about having Elisabeth Kübler-Ross as your mom.
Well, let's see. My mother always dreamed of going to Africa as a child, and so we went down to Africa several times, South Africa, Botswana, Zimbabwe, to begin hospices. And we were with the Ndebele tribe, and the ones with the long necks.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so we're having a great time. We're just a very remote village, and a car pulls up and says, "Excuse me, is one of you Elisabeth Kübler-Ross?" And my mother said, "Yeah." "Oh, well, this man Credo Mutwa, who's a Zulu witch doctor, wants to meet with you." She goes, "Okay, let's go." And we just jump into the stranger's car, and we drive like 4 hours. I'm like, this is kind of crazy, but So we get there, and we go in a tent, and here's the chief Zulu witch doctor of all the Zulus, and he's like the 600-pound witch doctor sitting in this large tent. And my mother proceeded to have a 4-hour conversation with her. And it was just an amazing conversation. They were talking about aliens and grief and life and, how the Africans perceive death and how they approach, people who are dying and so forth. And it's like, wow, this is pretty crazy. And he's like, "Elisabeth, I'm your biggest fan, I'm like, wow, like this Zulu witch doctor knows my mother. This is incredible.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so
Wow,
that stands out.
That's a wonderful story.
It is.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, why did she become a doctor? When you said that, it was
Yeah.
one of the things I'm like, wow.
I think she was born to it. I mean, when she was young, she used to take in stray animals and heal them. And, I think she was playing doctor with the animals. And then, again, grief was very much a part of her village life. Some of her friends died. One of her neighbors fell out of a tree and broke his neck. And my mother almost died once when she was 4 or 5 years old.
Oh, really?
And
Was she
then
unconscious for a while?
She
or-
was. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
It's interesting. I ask that because I have heard so many great people like her who have been unconscious as children.
Mm-hmm.
And had these near-death experiences.
Yeah, and then
Yes,
she almost died after World War II. She caught typhoid
Oh.
when she was doing relief work
Wow,
and has spent several months recuperating in Denmark.
Uh-huh.
that's amazing.
Interesting.
And it sounds like she really took you everywhere and didn't try to shelter you from the work she was doing.
Oh.
You were right there.
Oh, yes, I
Which
met,
I love that about her.
healers and Eskimo healers and witch doctors and fortune tellers and tarot card readers in Lebanon and all sorts of things, you know, so.
Is there anything that you learned? I know there's probably a lot from your travels that you think is an amazing practice for people that have had a loss.
Wow, I don't even know where to start with that question.
It sounds like one of the
Read
things-
some of my mother's books.
It sounds like one of the
How's
things
that?
is just open communication and not creating taboos around these kind of things.
Yeah, you know, my mother was all
It's a part
about,
of
you know,
life.
think of yourself at the end of your life sitting in a chair and you're looking back on your life. How would you like to fill that photo album? You know, and like you're gonna get there, so let's break down the fears, break down the taboos, live your life large, you know, and don't live your life with fear, because fear is so
Yes.
ridiculous. When you get to the end of your life, all these little things are just, you know, nonsense. So go out there and live fully and live your life love-based, not fear-based.
So
It's-
make your life your message, which
Yeah,
Elisabeth
exactly.
did.
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
it's-
Love-based and not fear-based. I know she
I
talked
know.
about it a lot about love.
Yeah, unconditional love. I mean,
Yeah.
just, you know, life is short. Just take chances, and if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying hard enough.
I like that. And what I'm amazed about is she didn't have fear.
No, she was.
She jumps in a car with some guy and off you go.
Well,
Yeah.
think of it as a
Let's go,
child
Kenneth.
going off. Her father's like, no way, and she's off to the village.
Yeah, my father's much more traditional, so I grew up a little conflicted between my parents.
Uh.
They're both brilliant doctors, but very different. We often had, you know, little clashes at the dinner table about life after death and things like that.
Your grandfather said you can't go off to the village
Yeah.
and work.
Wait, what
And she
happened?
did. How her father told her that she couldn't go work at the, you know, leave and help the kids, right?
Anytime you waved the red flag in front of my mother, she was like the
She
bull.
did it.
She would go for it.
She was like the ball.
Oh, yeah. So,
I love it.
That's fun. Yeah.
What an amazing.
Now you've got a sister,
I do.
and she's not as involved in the organization as you are.
No, she's more of kind of followed my father's work as,
Ah.
you know, working with head trauma patients and so
Oh,
forth.
she's a doctor also.
She's a clinical psychologist.
Oh, a clinical
Okay.
psychologist.
Yeah, and she married a psychologist. And my stepmother's, you know, in the medical field.
Wow.
And everyone except me.
And so you're the one that's really keeping that legacy and going
It's
out.
kind of ironic, you know.
You're
I took
carrying
care
on
of-
your mother's work in a
It's
lot of
very
ways.
ironic because, you know, when my mom was passing, I took care of all her medical needs, even though I was the only one without training.
Oh, funny.
So how ironic is that? I mean, you know.
You're out there carrying the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross banner all
Yeah,
over the world.
you are. And thank you for doing that.
Yes.
No, it's
You're
a
an
privilege.
amazing kid. We love you.
Thank you.
Yes.
You're a wonderful person, and please visit the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross.org Foundation site. And we want to thank you guys for being on the show, and go to Helping
Thank you.
Parents Heal, right?
Yes.
.org,
Dot
and they're going to be having a conference in April in Tucson. I mean in Phoenix, so you might want to go.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And we want to thank everybody for watching this show today. And as Heidi and I always want to tell you, if you've lost hope, and I'm sure these folks all feel the same way, please lay down ours until you find your own, and God bless.